Damien. We're going to start today with a nice family photo. So this is me, my partner Sarah, and our dog Havoc at Crufts earlier this year. So it's our second year as competitors that we've qualified, and we had a win last year with Havoc in his event. So Sarah's been thinking about it for a while. She's been thinking about starting a dog training business, and it seemed like this was a pretty good time to start thinking about that. So that business is WolfieAndFriends. So it's named after our very first dog, who sadly passed away last year. So at this point in the process, Sarah's already got the company name, she's got a logo, and she's got the training experience because she's raised a dog to Crufts for 2 years in a row. What she's missing at this point is an online business platform that she can use to advertise and scale the business. So if we get a calendar out and we look at where we are at this stage, so Crufts is a 4-day dog-centric event that is at the start of March usually, so this year it started on the 5th of March. And the first commit to what became the WolfieAndFriends repo was on January the 26th. So that gives us 5 weeks between the end of January and the start of March, the last full week before Crufts. But really, so I've got a day job, I've got a bunch of household stuff, I've got various other commitments, don't even really have the 5 weeks. All I've actually got is a combination of lunchtimes, evenings and weekends. So what you're about to see is the story of what happened in those 5 weeks, how we started with an empty Git repo and made it into an income generating scaling web platform. So that was my job. So a little bit about me, this QR code tells you everything you need. This is socials, this is blog, this is also a link to the session resources that are in today, so there's a Git repo that contains those. So I am an AWS consultant at Steamhouse in Manchester, and then before that I've held various data roles going back the past 10 years. I'm the leader of AWS User Group Lancashire, and I'm an AWS community builder in the data category. So let's go back to the start of January, the end of January. What are we going to need to make this work? So we've got the fundamentals that every online platform needs. We're going to need a domain, we're going to need a website and email. And then I had a chat with Sarah earlier in the process, committing to the 3 main features that we felt were most beneficial going into Crufts. That being a contact page, because if people want to speak to Sarah, it's faster than giving out the email address, there's more likely to have retention if it's just an online form. A bookings platform, because if people want to hire Sarah's services as a dog walker, dog trainer, one-to-one, we want to be able to offer that while we're at Crufts. And a payments platform, because if people want to give us money, I don't want to have to turn them down. So this is a lot of work. This is a lot of work for 5 weeks, yet alone the amount of time we've actually got. So I looked into ways that we could save some time, just ways that I could actually get this a reality in 5 weeks. A couple came up. So the first one being buying against building. As a consultant, solutions architect, many software roles over the years, the temptation is to build everything. But with 5 weeks, that's just not going to happen. It's not viable. So I had to look around for frameworks that I could use to help me with the decision. And this is the one that kind of hit the most, resonated the most with me. The idea being that you would make a purchase, so a SaaS provider or provide different software vendor if you needed a faster implementation for a solution, or you just needed a complex problem solving in a short period. On the other hand, you would build something either if the SaaS provider cost is too high, or there's other kinds of costs besides financial costs as well. So if, for example, the features of the providers are too restrictive, you have an opportunity cost because you're having to compromise and potentially you're losing your key differentiators. So applying that model to what we're going to build, it laid out like this. Purchasing was either in the case of a solved problem, so the best example of this is email. I'm not building an email platform. And in the cases of booking platform and payments platforms, the vendor owns the risk. So in the case of the booking platform, they've got a well-tested environment that already offers bespoke features. And in the case of a payment system, if you can avoid making a payment system, do it because it's a logistical nightmare. I worked for a bank for 10 years. It really is a very heavy beast to get your head around. On the other hand, it made a lot of sense to build the site, build the contacts page, because that's the key differentiator over time. We're going to be able to add features to the site, going to be able to manage the communication channels of the contacts page, and over time this is going to be the differentiator. This is going to be how communications lines gets to Sarah. Another time saver, infrastructure as code. Now this is already a well-known DevOps practice, but it's also a very good time saver. So first and most obvious one, you don't necessarily know how to do something, you just need to instruct, in this case AWS, I want 2 instances, I want 2 serverless functions, and I'm just supplying the code, and then the infrastructure as code's taking care of that. I can also iterate faster than if I'm in the console, so if I'm having to manage the memory config on a Lambda function, or manage an ECS task, I can just express that as config and stay out the console. And I can also reuse existing code. So some of the code that has gone into WolfieAndFriends, and you'll see in a moment, is actually code from other projects that I've already built for myself. Or, in the case of AWS, they have a number of well-architected framework repositories, blog posts that contain code. All that code is entirely portable. And I'm not really doing anything particularly complex here, as you'll see shortly. So, main 2 infrastructure as code services, the CDK, in particular Python, because I'm a former data engineer, I'm closest to Python. And then Amplify for the site. So Amplify helps save a bit more time because it'll do things like provision the CDN, provision the storage, without me having to directly express that in the CDK. And the last introduction was the use of AI services. It's to save further time. In particular, QDeveloper and Kiro. So, just a brief introduction for those unfamiliar. QDeveloper is a plugin within your IDE of choice. I use Visual Studio Code. And you've got effectively a synchronous chat. So if you know what you want, you've got some quick work, QDeveloper's the best one to go down. Kiro, by contrast, has its own IDE. And it's built using a concept of spec-driven development, which I'll show you a demo of shortly. So this is useful if you want a more thoughtful approach, you're not entirely sure what you want, and you want to sit down with Kiro and work it out. So that's what I'm using. Let's go into how we're actually going to make this happen. Starting with the site and the contact page. So probably no surprises, we're at an AWS event. It was AWS that I was using for it. The main driver for that came down to cost. So I did look at places like Squarespace, like Ionos, that will give you effectively a prefab website. And while that solves a lot of the complexity, the minimum that Squarespace will ask for is £12 a month. In contrast, as you'll see later on with the cost for things like Amplify and S3, you're talking more or less pence, depending on your price point and your utilization. Customizability as well, if I can code it, then I can create it, so that's that sorted. And again, we've talked about there's a bunch of well-known serverless patterns that can just go straight in with changes in config. So this is what the architecture looks like for the WolfieAndFriends site at the moment. We've got 2 accounts, so I've got Route 53 in a separate networking account within my organization. That handles DNS for a few things, including WolfieAndFriends. We've then got a production account that holds the WolfieAndFriends infrastructure. So I've got an Amplify deployment containing the managed resources for that. And then I've got the CDK that contains the resources for my contact page. So pretty standard practice, API gateway, Lambda function, DynamoDB. So when I'm deploying, all I need to do is push the 2 stacks. So Amplify gets the website, which is a React site with Veep for testing. And then the CDK gets the infrastructure to handle the contact backend. When a user interacts with WolfieAndFriends, they first go to the Route 53 hosted zone in the networking account. That then directs them to the WolfieAndFriends production account, and they then get served the content. If they use the contact page, the Amplify page sends the payloads to the API gateway, which then goes through Lambda. Two places, it gets logged in a DynamoDB table for auditing and for GDPR compliance. And then it also gets sent by a SES endpoint to Sarah's Zoho inbox. Uses of AI in this project. So this was very much Q developer because a lot of the code was already here. So there's no real creation of new resources. As I said, I hold my hands up. I've been a data engineer, I've been a consultant. I have not done front end ever. So I got Q developer to write the entire Amplify front end for me. So just a rudimentary site and a test suite that has scaled over time. That by far was the biggest time saver. I can then do things like change the color scheme if I want, add and remove pages, but it's essentially the bedrock for the business. So that was in place quite quickly. Q developer, less so. So a lot of what was needed was already there. Because it's a new account, there's some basic boilerplate that goes in with every CDK. So I got Q developer to write that and a basic test suite for the infrastructure. Speaking of test suites, I got a rudimentary test suite for the Lambda function that I wrote, which again, very basic, but just making sure all my bases were covered. Also got a code check with Q developer as well. And as an aside, also got Q developer reviewing the pull requests that are going in through GitHub. So any requests that are going in get a separate review before that gets committed to my main branch. I've also got some pre-commit hooks before it actually gets committed in the first place that were also created by Q developer. And then lastly, I've got a holding page that I got Q to write for me as well. So in an example of how it saved time, this was the highly basic code that I gave it, the basic HTML that came from 25 years ago when I was studying. And all I gave Q developer was very simple prompts just to make it a little better looking. All I asked, I just wanted something better than a white text. In response, this isn't even all of the code that I got, so this is 2 minutes work. I got animated pause that I didn't ask for and a dog pun that I didn't want. So in terms of getting things off the ground fast, this was very encouraging from what I was getting. Quick review of the context page, just to show that from the front end. So you'll have seen this loads of times before, there's nothing new here, it's just to illustrate it. So just some very basic context page. If you try and send a message, but you don't acknowledge the privacy policy, then the site will block it, so this is all Amplify's work. And then when you tick it, it gives you feedback to say that the message has gone through, which then goes through the API gateway network. So we've now got a site, we've got the contacts page. Let's now talk about the booking. This was 100% a buy decision because there's no differentiator for WolfieAndFriends to have its own bespoke booking system. So this used Cal. Now, Cal operates a very similar space to retailers like Chronify and Calendly, but their free tier is markedly better and there's a lot more customizability up front. It's also a lot like developing with AWS, so it's very API driven. So you're just exchanging endpoints, exchanging credentials, so there's very simple integrations. And there's an embed function that they maintain as well, which I'll show you in a moment. So architecturally, this is quite simple. You've still got the Route 53, you've simplified this diagram a bit. But fundamentally, as a developer, when I create a Cal account, I get a public endpoint, because by design, most of this is public. It's a booking platform, so the public are going to have to interact with it. So you've actually got quite a simple integration point. So there's two different pathways to get this running. In terms of the parameters themselves, they are not in the Git repo, they're in my Bitwarden account for security. They were put into Amplify using the AWS CLI. And in terms of the changes to the Git repo, Cal actually have a React component that they service and they release. So you can just download that through the NPM library and then add it to the page. That then gets checked into Amplify and we've got a booking page. When the client interacts with that, they are basically interacting with cal.com straight away. So that looks like this. So we'll just get to a point where we can actually interact with the booking platform. And then you'll see very quickly, we are interacting with cal.com right now. So look at the URL, we're still in WolfieAndFriends, but now everything we're seeing here, so just a few test events at the moment, so you cannot currently book 2 minutes of Sarah's time, that's not exactly productive, but we can control from here things like how long the meetings are, what days are and aren't available, times of the day, all this kind of stuff, all is within cal.com as existing functionality. Additionally, a customer can self-serve here as well. So from quite a minimum architectural footprint, actually, we're quite far ahead in terms of what we can offer a customer. So I used Kiro for that. I'm going to show a demo of what that looked like from the developer side. So just run through a few things you're going to see in this demo. So when you're using Kiro for spec-driven development, it creates a bunch of documents within your Git repo. You can either Git ignore them or you can include them for reference. It depends what you want to do. The first document you get is a requirements document. So this covers a summary of the project, glossary of key terms, and you get a bunch of user stories and acceptance criteria. So much in line with if you were doing it as a project management. If you then accept that, Kiro creates a design document. So this is a step up now, this is more technical. So this goes into the project goals, it shows code samples, data models, integration patterns, and architecture diagrams. And then lastly, you get a task list. So this is a bullet point, action by action, play of exactly what it's going to implement. And it's a living document, so you're going to see in the demo shortly, you get routine updates as it's working through. Now, these documents are all quite long, so they're not here because you'd just be staring at them all day. So this is in a publicly available Git repo that's in the session resources that I showed earlier. It'll be at the end of the session again if you need them. So the only thing that's in this repo starting off is an existing Amplify site, a highly basic one, so Kiro's got something to work with. You'll also see, I mean, you've seen it a few times, there's a clock in the top right corner, so this is a real-time clock to give you an idea of how long this is all taking. So let's start it off. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show the current state of the placeholder site. So this is just loading the dev environment. You'll see there's nothing really there at all. Try not to worry about the blimp that's getting so close to us, by the way. So what we're going to do now is start interacting with Kiro. So we're going to tell it spec-driven development, and I'm going to paste a prompt. It's quite a long prompt. This is also in the sample repo. And basically what I'm asking for is booking integration for the site. And I'm giving it a few parameters, so it can ask me questions, I'm expecting unit tests, and I'm expecting a comparison between several providers. So you can now see Kiro starting to ask me questions. So it's asking things like, what are we building? How do you want to build it? And then from there, it's going to start actually doing the work. So the clock's going to speed up now. Kiro's asked me a bunch of questions because I've told it it can. I'm just going to answer those questions. Now you're going to see shortly on the left-hand side, Kiro's going to start creating artifacts in the folder. So it's created a .kiro folder. First thing it does is just capture some very basic config about the project. So we've told it we're doing a feature. I've told it that we're using spec-driven development. And we're now at the point that we've got a requirements document. So you can see this is quite long. We've already got several aspects to it. So we've got things like the unit tests that it's going to perform, how it's going to embed the booking agent within the site, going down to loading states and how the customer's going to know that things are actually working. We've also got updates in the chat, so Kiro's summarized what's going on. Now, advice for this part of the process, do check this out before you just agree to it, because this is going to be the bedrock that Kiro uses for the other two documentation pieces it's going to write. So there's a lot of documentation here to read. again, just make sure that it is correct. If it's not, you can either change the document yourself or you can communicate that with Kiro in the chat. So just doing some final checks in this stage of the demo. So shortly, I'm going to tell Kiro that it's okay to proceed to the design phase. Okay, so the clock speeds up again. Kiro's now doing a bunch of research, so it's looking at things like the CAL documentation, the NPM libraries, because what it's going to give now is things like an architecture diagram, the code it's going to use, how it's going to test the properties for the unit tests. So we're now getting more technical into this. If we're then happy, the final stage is to tell Kiro that it can go to a task list. Okay, so this is the quickest document. At this point, Kiro knows what we're doing. It's produced a design that we're happy with, and we've now got a task list. So you can see individual bullet points for everything Kiro's going to do. You can see some are not listed as required, so these are generally unit tests in my experience, where they're there because I've asked for them, but they're not required. The app could function without them. Now we're going to tell Kiro to start the first task. And you're going to get two ways of feedback into what Kiro's actually doing. So we're going to see in the chat and on the actual task list itself, so you can now see there's a spinny wheel with the task in process. And Kiro's also going to update us within the chat. It's now asking if it can start running commands, so it's building the test suite at this point, so it's installing various NPM libraries and the CAL embed function. And within this, so there's a couple of options. You can either accept the commands one at a time, or you can choose to trust Kiro if you're confident with what it's going to do. That is, it depends between projects really. It's a matter for personal perspective. You can see we're getting continuous updates with what's happening. So pretty soon, now you can see it's marked the task as complete. So Kiro's now going to tell us that task one's done. So we're now at 15 minutes in. We've got 3 production level documents. We've got the first stage of a task list. We've got the first task done. And then from there, we could move on with the rest of the items of that task list. So let's now speak about payments. So we're coming into the final thing. So payments, as I've said, do not build a payments platform if you can help it. In this case, we went with Stripe. So there's a few players in this field, PayPal, Square, they all tend to offer API platforms, so they abstract a lot of that complexity away. Stripe kind of have the lowest fees of the bunch as well, so none of them are completely free, but as you'll see in the cost later on, compared to PayPal, compared to Square, they're quite reasonable and they don't require any additional infrastructure. Crucially, Stripe also has an integration with CAL. So what you can do is link your 2 accounts, and then one of the main things is you can set a booking in CAL so that it only approves, it'll only actually add to Sarah's calendar when the payment's approved. And that is handled entirely between these 2 providers. It's not code I have to write at all. So it's one important less thing that I have to manage. So there's quite a lot of infrastructure now. So just break that down, what that looks like. So first of all, we do have Stripe credentials. They are significantly more personal. So we're talking about bank accounts now, we're talking about interactivity. So they go straight into they go straight into parameter store, I should say, as secure strings. So they don't need to rotate, but they do need to be encrypted. So parameter store for those. And we've got changes to Amplify and to the CloudFormation stack. So Amplify gets a new shop page, and the CDK gets a bunch of dedicated infrastructure for the payment system for Stripe. So we've got 2 new Lambda functions, a bunch of new DynamoDBs, one of which is referenced here, and some additional API gateway endpoints. So we've got a customer making a purchase. That customer interacts with the Amplify page, which sends a payload to the API gateway. That then gets sent to the Lambda function, which just nips to parameter store, gets the details it needs for Stripe, and sends the whole thing over to Stripe for authentication. Now we don't know how long Stripe's going to take, so this is an asynchronous part of the process. As soon as that Lambda function has sent the payload, it stops. That Lambda's done what it needs to do, so it'll record what's happened for some back-end authentication, just so we can know what's going on, so we can make sure that everything's worked, but it's not waiting for a reply back. When Stripe processes the payment, it sends a message back to the API gateway, which goes to a second Lambda, so it's on a webhook waiting for a reply. So the Lambda will then check that the details that have come back from Stripe are the same as the ones that got sent to it, so it can do its reconciliation. It then records in DynamoDB that there's been a successful sale and communicates via SES to the retailer and to us as the developer to let us know that the payment's gone through. So from the user journey, this is quite simple. So we'll just go to the payment systems part of the site. And each of these buttons will trigger the API Gateway Lambda service that we spoke about before. Immediately now, we're straight in Stripe. So this is a seamless journey for the user. They're not having to go back and forth. This has all been handled for them. And then when the payment completes, we go back to WolfieAndFriends with an outcome for the payment. So I've made Kiro sound fantastic. I'm not going to go through the same process again because it was pretty much the same process as it was for the booking. So as the final part of this, I'm just going to talk about some of the gotchas that I found when I was working with it, just so people are aware going out if they try it for themselves. So Kiro is not immune to bugs. There were a few bugs that it came out with, and this one's probably the most damaging that I caught during a code review that I did. So you've just seen the shop. So this is this process is unchanged. So Amplify shop, API Gateway, Lambda function, Stripe. The first version of the shop that Kiro wanted to release, it designed it that Amplify had all the details for all the products, including the price. And it then sent that in a JSON array down the pipeline. There is a problem with this. It's quite a significant problem in that it is entirely possible to intercept it and change the amount to pretty much whatever you want. So if you open your DevTools console, you can quite easily go in, change that £15 to a 1, suddenly we're selling £15 dog leads for 1p. Needless to say, that didn't make it very far past the code review. So instead, made the change to it. So now, in the first change to this, there was actually a dictionary within the Lambda function that had the prices. Don't do that, that does not scale. So what it now does is a DynamoDB table that has all the products, all the prices, everything like that, and you've got a single version of truth for the site and for any functions that deal with the payments. So this kind of goes into one of the main things. Kiro will write you some fantastic stuff, but you still have to check it. So check what it's writing for requirements, check the code that it's writing as well. The other thing to think about is how you're actually using Kiro. So this seems to vary between providers. Some it's tokenization, some utilization. Kiro uses credits. So this is the Kiro pricing page. And within that, this is the credit allocation. So I'm currently using Kiro Pro, $20 a month, and you get 1,000 credits. This is the AWS definition of a credit. It's perhaps a little woolly, would say. From my personal experience, the longer the prompt takes to work and the more work it's doing, the more credits you will use. So if it's just something like a quick one-liner, it might be 0.25 of a credit, so it can get very granular, going up to 5 or 6 credits, depending on the amount of work you're asking it to do. So this is important. You've got a table here of all the models that Kiro currently has access to. This is from the Kiro documentation. And within that, this is the cost at which they use credits. So effectively, it's a cost multiplier per unit of work. Now within Kiro, you always default to auto. So auto in the context of Kiro, it'll look at your prompt, it'll make a decision which model is best, and it will generally choose one of the Claude Sonnet 4X models, so it could be 4.0 going up to 4.6. But that will always be the same. It's 1 credit to 1 unit of work. If you change that, you then change the dynamic. So even if you're choosing Claude Sonnet 4.0, you're automatically now paying 1.3 credits per unit of work. And then if you're choosing Opus, so the more extreme end, you're going up to 2.2 times. So this is impactful on how you're using it, because sooner or later you're going to hit your 1,000, you're going to hit your 2,000. And if you're not aware of what model you're using, you're going to hit it that little bit faster. Which isn't to say this is a black box. So within the Kiro console, you can see what model you're using, you can see whether you're set to auto or not. And if you open that, you can also see what the credit utilization is of the model. So you're not blind to what you're using. And you can also see what your utilization is. So you can see, in this case, I've gone to Kiro Pro Plus, so I've got more credits for this month, but you can see how much is there, and you can refresh that either clicking it yourself, or AWS will cycle it every 4 or 5 minutes. So, draw things to a close. Where's Wolfie and Friends now? So we're on 94 commits. So yeah, check it, because Kiro doesn't always get it right. It's far from the only bug it got in there. 94 commits, almost 600 unit tests, 16 AWS services in play. It's costing me probably about $2 a month. So this graph is the Wolfie and Friends production account. Amplify was the main expense, particularly around Crufts, because there are a lot of deployments going on, but you can see that's settled down. There are some costs missing from this. So there's a Route 53 hosted zone that isn't on this graph because I didn't tag it properly. There's also the domain itself. So this is a one-off annual fee of it was $9 for that one. So even if you average that over the 12 months, you're talking less than $1, which is where the roughly $2 a month comes from. Stripe is listed about $4.50, so Stripe take 50p from every £20 training session that Sarah does. So we've got some of our customers use Stripe, the majority tend to pay in cash, so Stripe's covering us for those costs. Kiro isn't listed mainly because it's an expense for me. I'm a consultant by trade, it does a lot of things for me. So in the same way that I don't bill for use of my OneDrive, for example, I'm not billing for use of Kiro as part of Wolfie and Friends because it's doing quite a lot. The trade-off for all this is that Wolfie and Friends is generating revenue. So since it started, and these are week beginning charts, so week beginning the 9th of March, we've got a regular class, so we've got 3 people coming to classes. We had a dip over Easter because it's Easter, people do things, you know. But we're generating £60 a week for a $2 monthly outspend. So, you know, I suppose the main thing through this, there's a lot of doom and gloom around AI at the moment. There's a lot of, it's going to take things away, it's going to stop things happening. But for what I've used it for here, I've used it to create a business that didn't exist at the start of the year. It's a chance for me to actually do something that's going to help people I care about, because a lot of the consultancy stuff that I do is just me in a room for a couple of hours and Sarah doesn't know what I'm doing. So it's great to actually do something that's helping my partner. And ultimately, it wouldn't have happened without it. So it's not that I've taken the work away from someone that would have done it. We just wouldn't have done it. We're both busy people. There's not enough hours in a day. I'm sure we can all relate to that. So yeah, it's helped me help my partner do something that we've always wanted to do. Thanks for your time, everyone. Take care.